Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox Recording here. Welcome to Home Studio Mixing Part 3. So within this week's 3-part video series, we're covering many of the common pitfalls and traps that so many home studio and project studio owners face when doing projects or mixing projects out of their studios. And in today's tutorial, I'm gonna talk a little bit about mastering and why it's not the secret to achieving better results in your studio. So many home studio owners and project studio owners think that mastering will save their lackluster productions and that mastering is some mythical process that does amazing things to your mix. I have news for you. If your mix sucks, your master's gonna suck. The question is, what do you do about it? Well, let's jump into the tutorial and find out. All right, welcome back. Here we are in my DAW, and I have 2 versions of a mix that I want to play for you of a production that I've recently wrapped up. Right here is the final mix of the song, the non-mastered version. And let's take a quick listen to it. All right, so as you could hear, a nice punchy final mix, nice and clear, but it's unmastered. Let's now listen to the mastered version of this exact same mix. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, it's not a drastic difference. Maybe it's a little punchier and definitely a little louder, but it's not night and day. Again, let's compare. By the way, the audio sample that you hear here in this video is of a band that I've worked with called Poeta. There's a link in this video's description if you want to check out their music. If you notice, the stereo width was already there in the mix. The clarity was already there in the mix. The guitar tones, drum tones, everything was already there in the mix. The truth is, a lot of people don't really understand what mastering is. And I'm gonna be honest, back in the day when I first got into production, I didn't understand what mastering was. I used to think mastering was some magical process that can fix your bad drum sound, fix your guitar tone, make your mix sound huge. But in reality, mastering, when done right on a mix that was mixed right in the first place, should only be that final 10 to 5% of the resulting final production. And this right here is a real-world example of this. In other words, if you have issues in your mix, do not expect a mastering engineer to fix them, and do not expect to buy some fancy mastering plugin that will supposedly make your mix wider or clearer or deeper, or any other supposed fix when it comes to deficiencies in your mix. So the question is, how do you get your mix right in the first place so you can make the mastering process an absolute breeze? Whether you're mastering the song yourself or you're sending your song out to a mastering engineer. Well, let's dive into the actual DAW session of the exact mix you just heard. So here is the actual DAW session from the mix you just heard. I'll play it back for a second. Now, when it comes to mastering, for the most part, people are looking for 2 things primarily: width and volume. Now let's talk a little bit about width. I don't know what it is or where this comes from, but for some reason when people start out with mixing, they're freaked out about hard panning their instruments. Now, if you've ever watched any pro mixer, like for example, Chris Lord Algae, a lot of these heavy music mixers use an LCR panning method, meaning most of their tracks are either hard left, in the middle, or hard right. And that's what I like to follow in my production. Yes, I do pan in certain elements. Like in this mix, I'm panning the overheads in slightly because I have so many wide room mics happening. But the large majority of my tracks are either on the left, on the right 100% or right up the middle. And guess what happens when you pan like this? You end up with a wider mix. Now, I know there are people out there that'll say you'll end up with big mono or you'll end up with a smaller mix because everything's on the sides. But you got to remember, if your mix is balanced, like you have a kick drum in the middle, snare drum in the middle, vocal in the middle, lead guitar in the middle, then you have a rhythm guitar on the left, rhythm guitar on the right, you're going to have a balanced mix when it comes to your stereo image. So right there is my simple approach to creating a wide mix, is to use mainly an LCR panning method. I never use stereo wideners or anything like that. I just get it right at the source. And when it comes to volume, there are two primary places you're going to want to pay attention to. Number one is your drum mix. You're going to want to use some form of clipping or tape saturation on your drum mix in order to tame transients on your drums. I'm going to actually bypass my tape saturator that's on my drum bus, and let's pay close attention to where my drums are peaking in my drum bus here. So without the tape saturator, my drums are peaking at around -14, -12. I'm going to re-engage the tape saturator, and let's pay attention to where the drums are now peaking. If you notice, my drums are now peaking at around actually a little below -16, but they sound just as loud. And that's the magic here. By using a clipper or a tape saturator, you're creating extra headroom in your mix without any adverse effects. And the final tip here when it comes to volume and creating a mix that's master ready is using little bits of processing on your two bus that are not doing a whole lot within themselves. So what I like to do is I like to stack, again, multiple processes that are doing very little bits of gain reduction within each plugin. So the net effect is a nice, balanced, level controlled mix before I even think about mastering. So for example, here's my two bus compressor. Let's take a look at the amount of gain reduction that's taking place. About 2 dB in this processor. Let's take a look at my tape saturator on my two bus. About half a dB to 1 dB. And then finally, my multi-band compressor. Let's look at how much. Around 2 dB of gain reduction. So in total, I have roughly around 5 dB of gain reduction on my two bus, but it sounds natural because it's happening at multiple stages. And this is what happens in the analog domain. When you record onto tape, there's a little bit of transient that's shaved off naturally. When you're mixing through an analog console, you have more saturation and more of the transient is softened slightly. And then if you use outboard compressors and other pieces of gear, this process adds up and you end up with a nice punchy mix without even having to try. Now, when you're mixing in the digital domain, it's too clean. So you have to do this intentionally. And this is exactly why I like to utilize this approach on my two bus. It keeps my mix nice and in control dynamically, and it's super loud before I even get to mastering. Remember, if you have one plugin and you slam your mix through it and try to do this at the end, or you try to achieve 5 to 7 dB of gain reduction all in one compressor, you won't end up with this result. Remember, it's a combination of these different things that'll produce a mix that's nice and loud and almost master ready. So as you can see, mastering isn't some magical, mystical process that's gonna, fix your mix if your mix is deficient when it comes to dynamics. What it comes down to is just understanding transient information within the mixing process itself, which I showed you in this tutorial. Now, if you're serious and you're really looking to improve the sound of your mixes and productions, you have to remember that so much of your final results comes to how well you understand basic, fundamental EQ and compression. And because of this, I'm offering you direct access right now to my crisp and clear heavy mix formula. The crisp and clear heavy mix formula is comprised of 3 primary components: an EQ and compression cheat sheet that you can refer to whenever you sit down to start a mix. And within the PDF guide, there are clickable links to private tutorials where I break down in detail how I mix each of the main instruments within a heavy production. And each of the video lessons comes with a multi-track download so you can mix the exact same raw multi-track that I'm mixing in the lesson. The crisp and clear heavy mix formula is free right now, and you can have direct access by clicking the link below in this video's description. Now, I really hope you've enjoyed this 3-part video series. I had a blast putting it together. And remember, you can achieve 100% professional results in your home studio as long as you focus on the things that actually matter. And until next time, happy mixing.